Hey, what's up, all you art geeks out there? Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the mistakes that you should avoid making when creating portrait oil paintings. This is a pretty big subject. I've made plenty of mistakes over my art career, and I wanted to talk about some of the things you can avoid to make life a bit easier for yourself. Now, before we get started, I want to quickly mention that I do have a Patreon account with a bunch of oil painting tutorials and some other tutorials as well to help you get started with your oil painting journey. And on top of that, there are also some art downloads every month where you can print them out, put them on your wall, whatever you want to do with them. Now, let's go ahead and get started with this discussion about making big mistakes with your oil painting process, your portrait painting process, whatever you want to call it. There are a lot of mistakes you want to avoid when you're creating a portrait painting, and we're just going to go through a few today. Now, to help me with this discussion, I did ask ChatGPT this very question: what are the biggest mistakes you can make with your portrait oil painting process? And it gave me quite a nice list. It gave me 10 points, and we're just going to go through these one by one. I haven't written down anything ahead of time. I'm just going to talk about this on the fly and see what my initial thoughts are when we go through these. So, all right, now the first one on the list is poor drawing from ChatGPT. And it says here, before diving into the painting process, ensure that your initial drawing is accurate. Mistakes in proportions or anatomy can be difficult to correct once painting begins. Now, I agree with this point. You definitely need to have a good drawing. There's no doubt about it. If you are required to have some accuracy with your freehand drawing, you got to lock this in. Now, the way I go about this is I go for the big, huge elements first. The most obvious shapes that I see in a portrait when I'm looking at a reference image is the biggest shapes. This may be the forehead, the cheeks, where the light and shadow is located, those general tonal shapes that you see, where the dark shapes are at, where the midtone shapes are at, where the highlights are located. You can start with these most basic fundamental shapes that you see, and then work your way down to the smaller and smaller shapes as you go. Okay, number 2 from ChatGPT is wrong color mixing. Incorrectly mixing colors can result in muddy or unnatural looking skin tones. Take time to study color theory and practice mixing skin tones to achieve realistic results. Agreed all across the board. Good job, ChatGPT. I like your point here. When I was first getting started with painting in general, back when I was doing acrylic painting, this is back in my early 20s, when I was trying to make the jump from drawing with pencil or charcoal and then going over to painting, that was a huge ordeal. I had to go through so many different websites to learn color mixing, but I knew at the foundation I needed to understand color mixing, I needed to understand color theory, all of the different things that go into making an accurate color. Now, this is a journey that I think will take quite a while for most people. This could take years to really master how to mix colors, find the colors you want. So make sure to take a lot of time with this step. Make sure that you practice your color mixing. It doesn't matter if it's watercolor, acrylic, oils. You have to understand color mixing. You have to understand color theory. You have to understand how to get to any single color possible when you're looking at it. All right, now the next one is overworking the painting. And when I've taught some classes for oil painting, this is a very common thing that people will make a mistake at. They will overwork their painting. All of the values will start to merge. All of the colors will start to get more and more muddy as you go. So there's a couple different things you can do to avoid overworking a painting. The first one is make sure when you start painting that you paint thin. Don't put too much paint down initially when you start the painting process. When you're just getting things blocked in, when you're getting those big shapes figured out and then working your way down to the smaller and smaller shapes, make sure that you gradually add more color to the painting. Don't keep blending and blending the color that's already on the panel. You want to add more color. You want to paint with paint. Now, if you do get to a point where you feel like your painting is getting overworked and there's just too much paint on there to make any changes, at this point, it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and stop for the week, let the painting become touch dry, and then start again. And as you go, as you get better with this, you'll get a flow to it where you know when to stop painting for the day. This happens to me all the time when I know that I put so much paint into something that I know I just have to stop for the day. I don't want to start muddying my colors. I don't want to start losing my values. And that is one of the key things you'll start to learn as you go. Another thing you can do besides just stopping for the day is you could just scrape off a bunch of paint. Say you just made a huge mistake, there's a bunch of paint already on the surface. You could just remove it. You could just take a paper towel or whatever towel you're using and just remove it so that you can adjust that painting in the same session. All right, number 4, I like this one because it actually has a lot to do with what we were just talking about with overworking your painting. But number 4 is lack of value control. This is something that I'm always watching out for. When I am making a painting, I always try to find at least one spot that's full black and another spot that is full white. And as you go, some of these values might start to creep into the midtones more and more as you go. This means that you may need to stop for the day, let it dry, and adjust these values on your next pass. So make sure that the photos you're using are in good shape. Make sure that your photos have a lot of contrast. So make sure that you take your reference images, put it through Photoshop, check that the contrast is there so you have a good image to start with right off the bat. Number 5 is ignoring composition. And as a portrait painter, there are certain compositions that just naturally work better. If you put a head in the middle of your panel surface or your painting surface, that's a naturally good composition. Now, if you go too high with it, go too low with it, this can really mess up your composition. So make sure that you frame in your painting in Photoshop. Make sure to crop it in a place where it looks good to you. A lot of the time, a 3x3 grid of lines will really help you to locate certain things. Usually you do want to have things a little bit off center. That helps with composition. Usually, not always. There's so many rules you can break when it comes to composition. But if the composition of your reference image looks appealing, that's a good sign that you're in a good starting point. Just remember, you're not just painting a face, you're painting a composition. All right, number 6 is inaccurate lighting. This is a good one. It does kind of roll into drawing though. Getting your shadows correct, getting your lighting correct is right there with it. You need to be looking at how things work together. You need to understand the shape of the face. You need to understand the different planes of the face and how light is hitting certain areas of the face. Just by understanding anatomy, it will really greatly increase your understanding of how to see lighting accurately and just being able to represent that accurately as well. All right, number 7 is copying rather than observing from ChatGPT. And it says here, while it's tempting to directly copy a reference photo, relying too heavily on it can result in a stiff and lifeless painting. I agree with this 100%. With my paintings, I am going for a very strong impressionistic style, a lot of expressionism, some abstraction. And to get to that point, that reference image that I'm using is just a starting point. I always keep that in my mind, that image that I'm using as a reference is only a starting point. There are plenty of details that I'm not going to show. Now, if you want to be a hyperreal painter, then yes, you're going to be basically copying the photo. But I have to assume if you're watching this video, you're probably one of those that wants to be more impressionistic. You're not going for that realism. But one thing that people may tend to do, especially if you're trying to be impressionistic, you may accidentally let some details get a little bit too out of hand. You may make the eyes a little bit too detailed, and you may find that it just doesn't match with the rest of the style you're going for. So try to have a consistency with your impressionism. I think the best way to think of this is that reference image is just a means to an end, a means to getting to the style that you're after. All right, this next one's pretty good. Ignoring brushwork. Brushwork adds texture and personality to a painting. I totally agree with this one. When I start a painting, I love throwing in a bunch of just crazy brushstrokes, hoping that one of them will be that beautiful, elusive brushstroke that I want to leave all the way till the end of the painting. I like to have certain levels. I like to have big sweeping brushstrokes. I like to have small mark making. I like to have different textures using palette knives and brushes together. There are a lot of ways to give some life to your painting by not refining it too much. If you refine it too much, then your style won't be that apparent and you'll look like a lot of other painters and nobody will be able to recognize your work. All right, so number 9 is interesting because this is almost the opposite of what number 8 just said. So number 9 is neglecting details. All right, so it's saying this is a bad thing. While it's important to capture the essence of the subject, neglecting important details such as the eyes, mouth, and hands can detract from the overall likeness and impact of the portrait. Now, I will agree with this. There are certain details that you may want in your painting. If it's a commission painting, yes, you want the eyes, the nose, and the mouth to have a consistent amount of detail, but you can also be impressionistic at the same time and leave some details out. So just understand what your level of detail is. Make sure the client knows what detail you're after if it's a commission, and then you can work through that as you go. But don't think that every single detail needs to be accounted for. I've blown out the eyes hundreds of times. You're going to see with this painting that I am not showing the eyes with any real detail because this one isn't about the likeness. This painting is about showing energy, about showing emotion. So you don't need the eyes, mouth, and nose for every single painting. You can sometimes capture that emotion from one single detail and the rest can be much looser. But find your level of detail, find the style that you're after, and that will really help guide you before you start a painting. All right, now number 10 is one of my favorites. This one is Impatience, and this one has got to be one of my favorites because there are so many times I get impatient with my portrait paintings, especially when there's a lot going on, when I have hands involved, when there's a lot of different geometry and things I have to figure out to get things located in the right place. Sometimes those initial stages of just drawing can be very difficult for me where I get impatient and I start making stupid mistakes. And a lot of the time it'll happen towards the end of a painting where I feel like I'm getting so close to done and I keep reworking it and overworking it. And by the time I am done for the day, I realize I should have just stopped sooner, let it dry, allowed my brain to get a refreshing start the next day. And that way I would have a clear understanding of what I'm seeing. Sometimes you get this tunnel vision where the best thing you can do is just stop and work on something else. But that requires you to be patient and know that there's a process to the way you paint. Everybody's a little different, but make sure that you figure out what your process is that works best. Sometimes it means just working on a painting for 2 hours at a time, then jumping to something else. Some people can work on a painting all day and get a painting done properly. For me, I'm somewhere in between. I find that working about 4 hours max on a painting is the best way to go. But if I go longer than that, it's usually because I'm getting impatient and I want to get more done that day. But because I get that tunnel vision setting in, I know it would end up being better if I just stopped, let it dry, and then work on it on the next layer. All right, well, that was a great list by ChatGPT to get a nice discussion going. There are so many places where mistakes can be avoided. The drawing process, how you build your accuracy in, color mixing, value control, patience, and so many of these mistakes can be avoided. So let me know what you think. I'd love to know what kind of mistakes you make with your paintings. There's quite a few things that we probably overlooked in this little discussion, but for me, this captured quite a few that even I try to avoid myself. Impatience might be the best one, but also just poor drawing. But all of this really comes into being patient. I'd say the first 9 steps of this little discussion really relate to the 10th one, being impatient. So try to be patient with your whole journey as an artist. Be patient with learning. Be patient while you're actually painting. Now, once again, check out my Patreon tutorials if you want to learn more about my oil painting process. Please like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, all you art geeks, for checking out another video. I will talk to you again very soon. Bye.